There are no spoilers in this video, so hopefully I can help both narrators and players get ideas for a direction that their Ptolus game could take. Chapter 31 of the book does have narrators only content. It's called Campaign Advice, but it's got some great information, and basically I want to expound on that and go into more detail here. In this video, I'm going to discuss high-level plots that are possible in Ptolus. I'm going to turn this into a series of videos where I actually deep dive with super specific advice about how to start and run a game using each one of these plot lines, which I will include pre-written adventure modules that should make your life a lot easier. There's already a page on my website, which if you don't know what it is, it's ptol.us, and it's an unofficial Ptolus website with resources and a whole bunch of information on there, including it's mobile friendly, and there's a interactive map and stuff like that. So go check that out. You do have to prove you own the book before you are able to access all of the content. But this page has several great pre-written adventure modules that work very easily with Ptolus. I am constantly researching and expanding this list to hopefully make your life easier. Some of these are actually from Monte Cook Games and Monte Cook before MCG existed, and they are actually specific to Ptolus. But many of them aren't Ptolus specific, but they would work very, very well in the city with very minimal modification. Now, here are some Ptolus plot directions your game could take. The first is just dungeon delving, right? Beneath Ptolus is a huge maze of dungeons, tunnels, natural caverns, and sewers. You could easily run an entire campaign beneath the city and only pop up to sleep, eat, and resupply. Now, obviously, that would be terribly underutilizing this amazing setting, but my point is to give you an idea of Ghoul's Labyrinth's scope. Unfortunately, there's very little fleshed out about the actual dungeons. There are several sections with maps in the book, but some of those are not for casual exploration, like Mahadath's Asylum, forgive me if I pronounced that wrong, the prison, the Longfingers Guild. They all offer great story options, but they aren't places that your characters can just like wander into. So the only truly mapped out and populated dungeons are the Ratman's Nest and the Serpent Caves. The Ratman's Nest is perfect for first adventure, right? It's really low level, but the caves are a lot higher level encounter. So I'm going to, again, do another video where I'm going to make specific recommendations about adventure modules and even more about how to dive into each one of these, starting with dungeon adventures. Number 2 is Dwarvenhearth. Chapter 23 actually covers Dwarvenhearth very in-depthly. This dwarven city beneath Ptolus is incredibly fleshed out with a ton of history. If you want a party entirely of dwarves, this would be an awesome place to start. You might ask why I don't mention this in a dungeon delve. Well, it's because it's so extensive, it could be an entire campaign in and of itself. I won't be more specific here for the sake of players, I don't want any spoilers alerts, but if the concept of rescuing a lost and sealed dwarven city appeals to you, this could be a great option. Next is the Spire. The Spire is obviously the focal point of the entire city, right? 3,000 foot tall spike in the middle of the world, right? However, there's really only 3 adventures that directly involve it. The Bane Warrens, which is a dungeon crawl, then Goth Gomel and Jabal Shamar, both of which are very, very high level locations. Now, you could easily expand the Bane Warrens to be much bigger with additional modules containing dungeons. As you'll read in the Bane Warrens actual adventure module, the interior of the Spire also doesn't always fit the space provided. It's not necessarily constrained to the stone that you see. There are lots of extra dimensional spaces present, which this gives you nearly limitless customization options. Then beneath the Spire can be a maze of dungeons. Let's talk about guilds. If you think the guilds aren't likely to come up in your campaign, then think again. Why would the Bankers Guild and Sages Guild get into a tiff? Why do any two groups argue, right? Even the most mundane groups have politics and intrigues. Let me take a little snippet straight from the book that Monty suggests. He goes, imagine if someone embezzled all of the Cobbler's Guild's funds, and the guild master looks for somebody to help track down the culprit, perhaps using magic. But the culprit uses his or her ties with the Balakazar organization to help lay low. Now, suddenly, an associate with the Cobbler's Guild leads the player characters into potential conflict with one of the most powerful and dangerous groups in the city. Or perhaps a member of the Glassblower Guild was commissioned to create a glass orb to use in fashioning a magic item. Once the orb was finished, however, the artisan was found murdered. His fellow guilders want retribution, so they hire the PCs to see what they can find out. Then this leads into the dungeons, right? To give you an example, actually, from my campaign, Vokath, in disguise, greatly upset a few of the guilds because she approached them to buy raw materials, stone, glass, wood, but she didn't want to use their laborers to build her shop/house. She opted instead to use the magic item called the Lyre of Building. That's Lyre, not Liar, which it actually does all the labor, and this is definitely going to have repercussions moving forward. The other thing that you could do is your PCs could become a member of a guild, and then they're going to become enmeshed in those dealings in politics. Next, similar to guilds, is organizations. There are lots of organizations in Ptolus. Read through those and see what strikes your and your players' fancy. Most of the organizations are public, so the players can read about them and see if there's one that they want to join or perhaps swear vengeance against. My unofficial Ptolus website can even it has a mobile-friendly full version of the player's guide to Ptolus, so you can share that link with them, again, down below, and that lists all of the organizations that are public. Now, narrators, there are some which are hidden, not public, whatever, that's in the book. Check those out because they're really interesting as well. Next, the rise of chaos cults. The primary plot arc for the Chaos Cults comes from the Night of Dissolution adventure module, which is fantastic. I'm currently running it. It allows characters to go into the dungeons, they get to run around the city, encounter a lot of NPCs, and even deal with some politics. Plus, additionally, MCG just released as part of the Kickstarter the Return of the Eben Hand, which marries perfectly after you finish the Night of Dissolution. But apart from these adventures, there's still a ton of content that you could use with the Chaos Cults and Chaositech. How you use Chaositech in your campaign is up to you if you decide to use it at all, but there are multiple cults, so your adventurers could battle them or they could even join them. So it's up to you on what you want to do there if the Chaos Cults appeal to you. Next, let's talk about the Streets campaign, or like an urban adventure. Ptolus offers a setting like no other, okay? They have the most fleshed out streets, organizations, it's beyond compare. Your players could get mixed up with the criminal or lawful elements of the city. Perhaps they go to war against crime to clean up the streets, or they could just join one of the criminal organizations. They could become Vi assassins, thieves in the Longfingers Guild, or join one of the knightly orders to eradicate evil. The city is huge, and they could play the whole game in the city and never even go into the dungeons. That's another option. Now let's talk about Drow. There's a specific section of the book which discusses Drow beneath Ptolus. Now, Drow are one of the few races, maybe the only one actually, that have a standing order to kill on sight in Ptolus. So you don't want to be a Drow PC just walking around undisguised, right? That said, there are Drow in Ptolus who remain in disguise or who just hide in the shadows. The Chapter 33 adventures even deal with one. Then, Monty also wrote the Queen of Lies adventure module, which is linked on that page of mine, which actually addresses some Drow threats, and then the 5e module Out of the Abyss would also potentially work well beneath Ptolus. These are all things that are focused on Drow. Dreta Phantas. I can't go into too much detail about this one, but it is a really cool storyline, and it would make a perfect campaign for an all-elven party. I'm just going to have to say, narrators, read about it in the book, see if you're inspired to pursue it, and then share what you feel is appropriate with your players. Shadows. There is so much shadow in Ptolus. It's crazy, right? There is the noble house Sadar, which is also called House Shadow, that is dedicated to shadow. There's the business Shadow Sendings. There's the Shade Tower, the Shadow Theater, and more, okay? Now, there aren't specific adventures content tied to this, but narrators can read about the Shadow Tower and the Shadow of Ptolus to see if you get inspired. There is a lot of shadow magic in D&D, plus characters, classes that are even dedicated to shadow, so they could easily fit well into Ptolus if that's what you're interested in. Let's talk about politics. Not real-world politics, right? D&D politics. The Ptolus book has tons of political machinations between the fight for the Empire's throne, down to the relations between all the organizations, the cults, the criminal elements, the guilds, and more. You could easily run a political thriller campaign with all the elements in the city. You could even run a political thriller campaign that doesn't have any combat, because there is so much that you've already got built into the setting with all the relationships. There's even an awesome graphic in the book that shows the relationships between the organizations, so check that out. Now let's talk about the Dark Reliquary in the Necropolis. This evil place contains tons of secrets and tons of plot hooks. It's a series of high-level encounters, but that doesn't mean you can't start low and work your way up. Perhaps battling some of the evils of the Necropolis at night, joining the Keepers of the Veil, mounting a rescue mission, or your party could even go evil and work for the denizens of the Reliquary. Read through this section, Narrators, to discover some really cool plot points. I can't go into detail about all of them because I don't want to spoil something, but there is even a section at the end of the Necropolis chapter in the book that talks about scenarios you can use to involve the Dark Reliquary. Last but not least is just a sandbox game where you wander around. Now, obviously you need some knowledge of Ptolus to start with, but as a DM, if you wanted to just have your players show up in Ptolus and stumble through to find their way, there is so much content you could easily do that. Use the interactive map on my website. You and the players can get some information without seeing all the secrets. Look at the map, look at the different locations, the names of those locations, and just see what strikes your fancy and sandbox it, right? Wander around. The bottom line is you can run just about any campaign you can imagine in Ptolus. I am going to deep dive and do multiple videos about each one of these things that I mentioned to you. I think there were 13, to give you specific advice on how to start a campaign and also which adventure modules are going to make your life easier to run that type of campaign. Again, check out the adventure module page on my website. It's linked below. See some of the ones I recommend, and I am constantly adding to that page. If you have any recommendations for ones that you think should be added to that, please leave a comment on this video or, whatever way you want to get in touch with me. There's a contact form on the website, or we also have a Ptolus-specific Discord with some awesome discussion and some great narrators on there. Come join that. Again, link in the description. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe. Comment about which one of these campaigns is most interesting to you, or tell us what campaign you're already running, right? Most people say that it's a mix of all of these things. That's the way my campaign works. There's a little bit of dungeon delving, there's a little bit of politics, there's a little bit of the above ground stuff, there's a little bit with the organizations. My players actually just joined, or two of the players actually just joined the Knights of the Cord. So a lot of these campaigns are going to be all meshed together. So hopefully the deep dive videos will give you a little bit more content. But again, hopefully this inspired you to figure out where to take your campaign, or maybe gave you some ideas that you didn't know about that you could add to your campaign. Until next time, stay out of the shadow of the Spire.